How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So how do you think the lesson went today on temperature?
I think it went well. I think the kids were really engaged. It did go a little bit long, but I think they were excited to see, and I think having the pictures, both on the sheets and also on the screen, allowed them to sort of make connections with temperatures that maybe they didn't get a chance to before.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it wasn't a little extra practice to round for them, which they actually were pretty able to bring that skill back. So I was impressed.
Right. I like how the conversation kind of happened naturally with that. Yeah. Good. So one of the main focuses that I was looking at through the lesson was focusing on your questioning, and you're using how you would like to lead student thinking, because you mentioned to me how one of the things you wanted to work on or that you wanted in your classroom is student thinking and leading their thinking and guiding them instead of just telling them. And so that's one of the main things I focused on, how you use your questioning and how you guided them through their thinking. And I saw some really good questions that you used, and I wrote them down. Like when you first put up estimation clipboard and you asked them if they saw that before and having them explain their connection of using it before, that was really nice. And also that when you asked how did they know it was shorter, because that had them explaining their thinking, using the vocabulary shorter, longer, and when you had the temperature pictures up, asking them what's actually happening in the picture and relating that to the temperature was really nice. And then when you handed out the actual thermometers, I really liked how you had them notice what is different with this thermometer and the one that we've been using. So they really focus on the difference between the scales of counting by tens and one counting by fives. And again, it was that natural conversation that came out, just having them notice those things themselves. So those were really good questions I noticed that you used.
Thank you.
During our co-teaching of the estimation clipboard, what did you notice I did when I kind of inserted myself into the lesson?
When you started the questioning, when I got sort of gummed up with actually putting it up, like I exited out and then is that?
No, when I started, when it was already up and I just inserted myself to help guide the conversation a little more, what were some things you noticed I did, or questions I used, or?
Some questions you were using, like when you asked, like, what did you notice about the string, and you sort of introduced the talk and turn, which I thought was great, because I had sort of just been having them call out, but I think having them discuss, and then you sort of encouraged them to not just say numbers, but to say why, or your thinking, explaining your thinking to each other, so then when it was time, they could call out and say what they're explaining their thinking as well, so they sort of refine that with each other.
Yeah. I also had them look at the previous picture and do the comparing and sharing their thinking that way, how they were different.
Yeah.
And it was interesting what came out with that when one still thought one was the last picture was the longest, even though it wasn't.
Yeah.
So
it is interesting
that's why I like that program, because it has the progression and using the picture before to help make the next reasonable estimate. I also use some what are called talk moves. Have you ever heard talk moves before? To help get all the kids engaged.
Okay.
Not only the turn and talk was a big one that you noticed, but also does anybody want to add on to somebody's strategy?
Okay.
Or the
does anybody use the same or different?
Yeah, did somebody use the same? The connection thing, which I did notice that you threw in there.
I love that.
Also, one that would help when we were doing the rounding to really get all kids engaged that you're not sure if they're getting it is have them restate somebody else's strategy in their own words. Okay. That gets them engaged in the conversation, make sure that they understand.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so during the mini lesson, I liked how you had them notice what was happening in each picture. That went along with the temperature, like I said. When you asked the question, what number is it close to? That's when we noticed that Alana was the only one that really rounded 207 up to 210. So I hope you didn't mind when I jumped in there.
Oh, no, I think I was getting distracted by the funness of the pictures.
I know, because they were really engaged. They were really. So using opportunities like that when a student has that moment to guide again the conversation into where we were going next. It's like, oh great, I noticed Alana noticed where we're going next, so I'm going to use her because we might not know this, but they listen more to their peers than they listen to
crazy.
So what were some questions that I asked to help guide the students understand what Alana did without me telling them exactly what Alana did?
Well, you were definitely trying to get the word rounding out, and so you were sort of, you would say, what did they do with these numbers? How did Alana know to go up to 210, not 207? You were sort of using every strategy you could to, without saying, did she round the numbers? Or how do we know that 207 is closest to 210? Like, what is 210, like how is that related to 207? Things like that. And kids were saying, well, it's the nearest 10. Well, what did we do to get to the nearest 10? Do you remember the strategy that we used? And eventually, I think it was Jonathan or Carabelle said rounding. And then it was, and then everyone was like, oh yeah, rounding. So, and then everybody kind of was on the same page, I think, with that.
Yeah. It's hard to not want to just tell them and to keep going in a circle and find the right question that brings it out. But in the end, it is more beneficial because if I just sort of said the word rounding, some kids would have heard it, some wouldn't. But when Carabelle said it, we were all like, yes, and the whole class was all on board. So again, it's just that, you know, when they hear it from other students, they make those more meaning of the mathematics. So the natural conversation of strategies came about. So then I noticed when you inserted yourself back in, one thing you did do is you kind of told them about the rounding mountain. Instead of, one thing you could have done is, if nobody could remember a strategy or remember, what do you mean strategy? One thing you can do is do that turn and talk move, because that will have them talking to each other. What is rounding again? I don't remember. What did we do? And then some people might have remembered rounding mountain or the number line, or just remember what is rounding even mean. Instead of just saying it and telling them. And I know, you know, when you're short on time, you're trying to get things flowing and going.
Things rolling,
So when you ask students to round the number 65 on the thermometer, what did you notice I did during that?
You started writing things on the whiteboard.
What was I writing?
Well, you did. You were illustrating their strategies. So you did the rounding mountain, because that was one that I had set out right. So you drew
and rounding mountain. That was the one Jonathan explained.
Yes.
So I wrote it when Jonathan was talking about it.
Okay. And then Karatina, I think, said that it's just because it's 5 more, something like that. So it was more like a number line. So you drew the number line as well. Trying to think, and you illustrated the jumps, so you sort of illustrated for them as they were explaining visually, so that other kids, if they weren't necessarily engaging with the words that they were saying, they could see what you were doing on the whiteboard.
And and I asked Karatina to repeat herself to make sure I was recording it correctly and hearing it correctly, and all that's fine. It's not a mistake on the teacher, but having her restate it.
Of course,
And so why do you think it's important to actually record the strategies as the students are explaining them?
Well, I think on a basic level, it sort of is that affirmation of, okay, the teacher's writing down what I'm doing, it must be something correct. But also so that other students can see what other students are thinking, and also to just keep a record for our own selves. And I think also, did you leave it up there while they were doing so if they wanted to come back and look at that, if they had gotten to, like, I think sometime... the second question, if they had gotten to that second question of the rounding, they could go back and look at the strategies that their friends were using. So it just records it for both our records and then also for them to see.
Exactly. So I know we were running out of time at this point, and we wanted to include all the students, but like I said, if there's some students that you think you're losing during the rounding conversation and the writing of the strategies, there's always that turn and talk move that you can use to make sure all students are engaged. Because even if they get a little spacey, that kind of brings them back to the conversation. And I know we didn't have as much time as you would like for the chalk talk, but how do you think this part went?
I think it went well. I think, they knew what they were supposed to do, and with the heterogeneous groups, I think they do a really good job of keeping everybody. I saw one group with Amakar. Amakar was a little bit left out, so that's why I sort of stopped and helped him. But in general, I think everybody was sort of helping each other out with what they were supposed to be doing and the questions that they were supposed to be answering. And I think for the most part, they got it. Because they could associate it with the weather, and we had gone over the difference of like it didn't go up to 210 degrees, so the top is not going to be boiling water. I think they understood, okay, the 80 degrees is going to be sunny, so a lot of them filled up for like the pool picture. They filled it up all the way because they knew 80 degrees is about a sunny day. So yeah, I think it went well. I think they knew what they were supposed to do, and they did it.
I agree. Even though we didn't have time for the exit ticket, there was still evidence of student learning on the chalk talk and on their thermometers, getting the right temperature. And even for this table, they had different temperatures. It was still, all three were reasonable, even though they were different. So I do think that went well as well. And I did notice about Amakar as well. I'm saying the word as well a lot.
Yeah, that's okay.
And I overheard, and correct me if I'm wrong, he did give a reasonable estimate, but he had trouble kind of explaining his thinking.
He had trouble giving a reasonable estimate. I sort of had to help him get there. I think it was like a fall picture, and he was going to either put it at 0 or 80. So he was going to do 1, and I said, well, 0 is, and we sort of talked about what did the picture look like when we put it on 0. I said, was it sunny or was it snowy? He said snowy. And I said, when it was 80 degrees, was it people at the beach or was it people in the snow? And he said, well, it's people at the beach. And I said, do they look like it's really, really hot outside? Like they would be at the beach? And it was the fall picture. He said, no. And I was like, but it doesn't look like it's snowing either, it does it? And he was like, no. So maybe it's somewhere in between. He said, yeah. And he put like, I think 65. But
and
then
I think that's when I heard was...
Yeah, and then 65. He couldn't really give an answer. He just said, I think at one point he said, it's a little bit cold. It's not very cold. It's only a little bit cold. So
which is pretty good.
That was.
But we know he's in ESOL 1.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Do you remember we talked about the sentence strips for the ESOL students?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, don't apologize. It's okay. But that's another strategy that if we had that out there, maybe that could have helped with his thinking.
Yes.
But, I do like how you referred back to the pictures to help guide him to make that reasonable estimate. I didn't hear that part of the conversation, so that sounds like you did some nice things with that, referring and connecting to the mini lesson for him. So, sounds good. Did any of the students make it to the challenge questions at the bottom? I think I heard you with Cohen.
With Cohen's group, yes. They were talking about that. And he understood with the 20 degrees more. So he had 15 in his estimate, and then he got up to 35. But I don't think that they got to the second challenge question. I think they only got to the first one. And I did not see if anybody else got to the challenge questions. I don't think.
Yeah, I didn't notice that either. I don't think we had enough time, which was the question that kind of focused on rounding. So I think we might want to revisit and circle back to rounding because they really didn't have an opportunity to practice it. But yeah, I saw some of the students that worked that problem out and their strategies. Did with Cohen, did you use any questions to help guide his thinking, or do you think he kind of could explain himself? Or
I think he could explain himself. I think I read the question again to him and I said it's 20 degrees more. So what would be 20 degrees more than what you predicted? And he said 30. I said, is it 30? And he said, well, 35. So I prompted a little bit. So he was pretty good about, like, he knew what 20 degrees more, because he was also looking at the scale, too, and he could see what 20 more was on the picture.
Yeah. So asking again, having him relook at it, is 30 reasonable? Or?
And he also, like, I think he put like a line or something on 35 to show that was his answer as well. So,
cool. So did you at any point use any of the questions? If you can remember. I know it's hard to remember.
Let me see.
Any of these questions that I gave you before?
Did anyone get the same answer in a different way?
I do remember that one.
Did anyone get a different answer? What helped you decide how to get your, well, maybe not how to get your answer, but how did you make this estimate, especially with the estimation clipboard? What were you using to help you estimate? What would happen if, I think we got a really great opportunity to use that with the pictures. So it's like, what would happen if it was all the way at the top? What is the picture going to look like? Does it make sense to you, I think, in a different way? Does it seem like a reasonable, or would this seem more reasonable to you? Does it seem like a reasonable answer? I think we use that one a lot. And then explaining their way to the class. I think that was what we did when we were all sort of sitting on the carpet. I think those are pretty much, or how does this relate to, I guess, like, when have you seen thermometers before? So they were relating it to different things. Have you ever solved a problem like this before? So the estimation clipboard. I guess I could have said, how does this relate to what we did in science? I didn't specifically ask that, but I think they made that connection with the weather, or they kind of saw. Yeah, I think that was about.
That was a lot. I mean, I do think you used a lot of those, and
These
I'm
are
glad
great.
that this is helpful to you. So, continue.
Oh, thank you. I have it posted on my wall. So.
And I know that we haven't been able to do the exit ticket, but like I said, was there any examples of student learning that you did see to know what next steps to take?
Yeah, I guess one thing that I noticed that's not a huge deal, but one thing I noticed kind of across the board is that most of them just colored right next to the number. And in a thermometer, you go all the way down. I guess these kids got it, but that was something that they didn't know just off the bat.
Yeah, I think I did notice that on a couple. Yep.
Yeah, so you see there's a lot of ones where they just
How
color.
do they color it in?
Yes. Which again is not like the biggest deal, but when you're reading a thermometer, it fills up to that. I would say, looking here, somebody drew a thermometer and they drew out where it would end, depending on what degree it was. It says it because it looks like a nice hot day, which is like a quote from what was on the screen.
Yep.
So it looks like a nice hot day, so they knew. I bet Derek, well, he didn't do 80, and 80 was a nice hot day, but
yeah,
he was making that
Derek,
because it looks like a day that you can splash, maybe.
Splash, yeah.
Yeah.
It does look like a day you could splash.
It does. So I do see a lot of evidence of student thinking, just because they've either written out the way that they came to their number, or they just wrote the number itself, which I think is evidence that they're making those educated guesses.
That's the great thing about Chalk Talk.
I know, I love it.
They'll show it in many different ways, but the learning is still there and visible.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yes, I agree. I think that it was a successful lesson, and there was definitely student learning. So what do you think should be next steps?
Well, I think definitely the exit ticket is going to be a great next step, because it sort of takes what they've been talking about, what they were talking about here, and apply it in a problem solving, in a more of a test situation. So to see, because it'll be one thing for them to take this information and then apply it to an actual test question and see if that actually transfers. I did miss the fact that we didn't get to do the sharing on the carpet, so that would be nice if we could do that, because I think a lot of them had really fun strategies, and I think they were engaged enough that they wanted to talk about it. And I think it would be something that's accessible for all of them to talk about. I don't think it's an intimidating problem, so I don't think anybody would feel like not confident enough. And then definitely reintroducing the rounding for sure. Just to reinforce that piece, because that is a big part of this part of the measurement. So.
Yeah. I agree with all those points. Yeah, so do you have any questions for me, or?
Overall, if there was anything that you would have done differently, I definitely, it's really going to be a task for me to get rid of the habit of sort of helping them by giving them like maybe a piece of the answer or part of the answer to sort of prompt the rest of it. So that, and like what you said, like when we're running out of time or things are going long and you're like, okay, like that's just, and it just keeps going around and around and around and you just want to say, okay, it's this. But is there anything else that you would have done differently?
Well, things that I already
Yes.
kind of suggested
Yeah.
with more of the talk moves and the turn and talk. But like I've already seen with you like great improvement in this area since the beginning with us. With me, with us, my multiple person.
Yes, of course. Becky one, Becky two.
That you're definitely working on that area, and I've already seen improvement. I've already seen less giving and more questioning and using questions to lead and guide their thinking. So I really do see that already in you and know that, you know, I really appreciate that you're very reflective and you just want what's best for teaching, and you know, you're not defensive, you're very open. It's helpful, and you know, we've only had a quarter and I already have seen a lot of growth in that area for you. But differently, I mean, I guess there's areas we might want to shorten a little just because we did run out of time, or extend it over a 2-day lesson, which is fine as well. Pacing in our situation with the snow day makes it difficult. But maybe the estimation clipboard, since we did so many, I know that was my suggestion, but maybe only do 2 images instead of all 4, just to shorten it a little.
I think I definitely could have just done maybe 3 temperatures, like maybe the middle, the bottom, and the top, and then maybe one that's sort of in between, because it started at in between. But I think we didn't necessarily need to go through all of the different things.
But they got really excited.
They
when
were.
Then
When it changed,
yes.
when it changed, it was very exciting.
-140.
I know, or -40, whatever it was.
Yeah, so a little bit more strategic on which pictures we should have shown. Yeah, definitely. But yeah, I think it went great. So good job.
Thank you. Well, your help has been wonderful. So.